As a child, I was always encouraged to practice my art from a young age, and around our house we always had paintings up, which my granddad, who died when I was 2, had done. He was an amateur artist and he painted with watercolours. His paintings were very opaque and dense, like oils, and I always admired his work. So when I was around 11 or 12, my dad gave me his own watercolour set so that I could practice with. And I took this watercolour set with me everywhere, when we went on holidays and when we went on days out. I skipped GCSE art and took it up again during A-levels, where I was inspired by the Impressionist movement, particularly the light on water and light captured through trees. And I was very inspired by the works of Monet in particular. After a visit with my family to the Fairy Glen, which is a gorge near Betws-y-Coed in North Wales, I was really moved by the location and decided to do a painting. This was my first oil painting and I was 15 years of age. I'd had all the experience with watercolours, but the media was very different, and I was trying to copy aspects of Impressionist art with dappled light through trees and capturing a fleeting image of light on water. I was very influenced by the works of David Hockney, especially during my A-levels. He was a local artist for me. I was fascinated with a series of paintings he'd done on his swimming pool and figures which were swimming through the pool and distorted by the light and the movement of the surface. So I tried to capture a similar image. At university, I decided not to study art, but to study a science. So at the University of Wales, Bangor, I studied applied terrestrial and marine ecology, which allowed me to focus on nature and wildlife, and this inspired my artwork even more. A lot of my paintings started to take on scientific backgrounds, such as jade ice, which demonstrates the refraction of light through freshwater algae between ice crystals which are formed at the bottom of ice shelves. During a short holiday in Cornwall, I decided to use the opportunity to take lots of pictures of beautiful locations with light on water so that I could also practice the reflection of light. Cyfrac is a favourite location of mine and always has been. The sun was setting beautifully that day. I just was fascinated with the shadows of the boats and trying to capture the reflection back and the warmth of that evening. With the wave painting, I tended to try and get away from using brushes, particularly for the sky and the spray of water and the clouds. This was a spontaneous decision of mine halfway through the painting to use my fingers instead, because it allowed me to brush the paint where I needed to and blend it very smoothly without streaks, and also give it a very fluid movement. During my time at university, I decided to do a monochromatic piece called Cityscape, which I painted with a very limited palette of white through to blue and black. And this allowed me to focus more on the light and shadows and less on the image as a whole. I've always been fascinated by trying to make light look as though it's actually coming from the painting itself, as though there's a bulb behind the canvas. And so I focused on the buildings to try and make them actually look as though they were on. All the lights were on in those buildings. After university, I worked as a research intern in the Royal Botanical Gardens Kew for several months. Whilst I was there, I saw lots of different botanical illustrations of different species, which I thought were beautiful and so intricate. After that, I worked in the Ebo rainforest, Cameroon, for 6 months, and whilst I was there, I just decided to practice the same skill. Whenever I had a day off in camp, I'd take out my sketchbook and my pencils and try and sketch any interesting species in and around the area. The first one I did was an Araceae plant, which I just thought was beautiful. the light that day was changing so fast through the trees that I had to draw very, very fast. The Uapaka tree was a very fast-growing species. This particular tree was very close to my tent, and I was just amazed by the roots which were springing out at head height. We had a cocoa tree in the middle of the camp which had some beautiful beans hanging off of it. Came across this beautiful river, Mukakambom River. The trees were so tall and overhanging. It looks from this painting like a picture in England, but the scale of it was massive. I tried to paint it in an impressionist style again because it was such a fleeting moment. I thought this is the only way I can really capture the softness of the scene. So that is why I use such fast and loose brushstrokes. After I'd returned from Cameroon, I was fascinated by the vibrancy of colour in African art and decided to do my own painting of an African woman and child in mixed media. I used acrylic and watercolour and ink. Also, whilst I was there, I realised that the African art was very similar to Art Deco in places and very vibrant. And I'd always loved Gustav Klimt's Three Ages of Women, so I decided to do my own African version of that, which was Mother and Child too. I reused the same picture of the child because it represented to me how close the African women were to their babies. Whilst I was there, I saw how natural their mothering was, and just from the way that the child was wrapped so closely around the mother signified for me how close to nature they were. Art for me is a visual snapshot of history and the way that I was feeling at the time, or what I was influenced by, whether it be science and nature or something relationship-wise. Throughout the future, I think I'm going to be continually trying out lots of different styles until I find my own niche.